Live. I think we're live. I think we are live. My first time going live. I think we are live. My first time going live. All right. Cool. Yuval, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep. All right. Good. I can hear you. The screen sharing. We're live on Twitch. I think we're live on YouTube as well. I think I need to mute YouTube because I'm getting a bit of feedback. 1 second. All right. Lovely. All right, cool, man. Welcome to another episode of the Bitcoin Developers channel. I am your host, Connor Okus. On this episode, we're going to start. This is a start of a number of episodes kind of dedicated to trying to give us a foundation to better understand how we can improve privacy within Bitcoin, give us a real strong, at least to start with, theoretical foundation of some of the more important areas we should like be focusing on when it comes to improving privacy, trying to understand why it's important. One, and we have our like expert guest here who's going to help take us on that journey. So yeah, Yuval, thank you for joining me today. Look forward to like the this video and up and coming streams focused on this kind of stuff. But what I've done with most of my guests in the past is just help people understand how you got into Bitcoin, why you got into Bitcoin, and kind of why it's important to you, and kind of what you're working on these days.
I guess it starts a bit before Bitcoin. Like my dad attended this lecture on, I guess, cryptographic stuff that pertains to online payments. And then he came home and told me about linkable ring signatures and blind signatures and the double spend problem. And I was like, I'm gonna learn all of this and fix it. And a few years later, I was, or actually not even a few years later, quite around the same time, I was also using Hashcash on my server. So I had this like mail server, and I didn't have a proper DNS entry, so I was getting spam blocked. Um, and when Bitcoin came around, I was like, oh, I know all of this. Clearly, I'm the expert, and this will never work. and Yeah, it took a few more tries until I let go of my idiotic prejudice. And I think around 2015, I realized it's not going away, and it's uh, an actual way for software to affect global politics potentially. And it was more in line with my open source sort of ethos. And eventually, I managed to wrap my head around the superficial problems that I saw in it, and became convinced that it is an important thing for humanity. I think an important thing for addressing energy, uh, climate change, things like resisting oppressive governments. So it has many useful attributes that I just felt were important to work on.
Hmm.
And specifically, censorship resistance seems to be its like unique feature. And kind of my longtime obsession was, well, that doesn't really work out without strong privacy guarantees. So yeah, here I am.
Okay, cool. And what is it about the open source side that kind of attracts you?
I was getting a bit cynical with just software development in general. It felt to me like I was a bit like the enforcer in a sort of elaborate bureaucratic extortion racket. Moving the bits from here to there so that the advertisers can get their pound of flesh. and it all felt kind of like meaningless. Like, is anything that I'm writing going to be around in a few years? And is it actually a net benefit to humanity? Like, I've been telling myself, you wrote a bunch of open source code, you made the world better, but was it actually true? And I think in Bitcoin's case, it's much more clearly demonstrably true. Like, the impact is there. It's a complicated set of effects. Like, different people's values might judge it differently. Some might say, it's causing more scams or whatever online, and that's a net harm. Or people who I think don't really understand proof of work claim that it's like bad for like climate change reasons, or just a waste of energy. Or but like, if you look deep into all of these things, I think the net impact is more freedom to resist coercive control by people with power. And to me, that's just a net benefit. And it's kind of magical that open source code is able to facilitate that, just because of our shared beliefs about what the code means. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, totally agree there. And what about someone who wants to get started contributing to Bitcoin and open source? What advice would you give them? Because you've been in the space for quite a number of years now, and are well established in the space. But I can imagine, obviously, like that wasn't always the case. You had to kind of find your feet and find your way, and find the kind of area that you wanted to focus on the most. So, like, what advice would you give to people who are wanting to contribute?
I would say I'm not the right person to give that advice. It took me a lot longer than I thought. Like, just trying to get to grips with all the different things I felt I had to learn, including like a bunch of like shitcoins, and how they, like, why, even though they make compelling claims,
Mm,
um, they're not what I should be working on. That took me a long while to digest. And then I was kind of involved with a project that, in hindsight, I consider a scam. So,
mhm,
yeah, I think don't be afraid. Like, the math is not scary. Elliptic curve cryptography is not magic. Um, just spend some time on it, get some confidence, and start small. And yeah, I think that's the if I could give myself advice, that's the advice I would give. I don't know how translatable it is to other people's situations.
yeah, I think that's sound. To be honest, I think that's pretty sound. All right, cool. So let's dive in here then. So let's before we dive into some of the tabs and different websites and stuff we got here, can you just one more time kind of describe why you feel privacy is important for Bitcoin?
Yeah. So Bitcoin is, as we will look at the paper and a bunch of follow-up work, Bitcoin is kind of defined to be a pseudonymous system, which means that you generate, at least in principle, you generate a unique address or a unique public key that is then encoded as an address for every transaction. And in principle, those can't really be strongly linked to each other. Um, in practice, however, that's often not the case for a variety of reasons that we'll look at today and then the next streams. Um, this means that there's threats to personal safety. So if you transact and you leak information, like, for example, let's say you withdrew a large amount from an exchange, and then you did a small payment to some shady web shop or something right after. And that shady web shop then gets hacked and leaks the information. anybody can see that you used a large coin to spend with that, and that's like an advertisement for like we've seen Jameson Lopp has been tracking this in his physical attacks repository. Incidents of people being attacked in order to get their coins, those are on the rise. So that's just a general like hazard that paying with Bitcoin exposes you to if you don't protect your privacy. And I think it's especially a concern with high volatility and cold storage. Like maybe you withdrew $100 10 years ago, but the price is now 100 times, and that's a substantial amount. I guess maybe $10,000 is
Mm-hmm.
not sufficient for gangsters to. But like the
Mm-hmm.
point is, it's hard to keep a sense of proportion of the risks with all the volatility going on. And then there's also the question of like that's more of a retail concern, but businesses they often need to protect their strategies. So using Bitcoin can be a liability for a business, and political dissidents. People who are just living under oppressed regimes and need a way to leave, right? Like Bitcoin is supposed to be this. You just memorize a seed phrase and you leave and you start a new life somewhere else with like you have a way to start, right? You're not just dropped into some new reality where poverty is your most likely outcome. Um, that also sort of, if you don't have that privacy going out, you can't really hide the fact that you have those savings. And a government that does not care about human rights will likely use violent force against you to either prevent you from leaving because you have that capital, or yeah. So, and we're seeing situations like I don't know, Nigeria, the anti-SARS
Mm-hmm.
protest successfully raised funds in
Mm-hmm.
that's an anti-police protest, like,
Mm-hmm.
and it's protesting violence on the part of a corrupt police unit. So, like, if if they can track your transaction activity and see your fundraising activity, and the entire problem is a police force engaging in violent behavior towards the public. That's kind of a dangerous situation to be in. So um, all of this is problematic, I think, mainly in terms of like what a typical wallet does to protect its users. Like most wallet developers are just not really experts on this thing, and
Mm-hmm.
the risks are, for most people it's not going to be an issue, but like who knows what's going to happen. Like maybe one day you wake up and you realize reality has changed, and what
Mm.
you did a few years ago is placing you in danger. Like the
Mm-hmm.
blockchain doesn't go away. The
Yeah.
transaction history is going to be there forever
Yeah.
unless it's Ripple. um,
True. I agree.
so like you, yeah, that there's just this um, like looming threat of people being harmed if they use this technology for what I discern to be its intended purpose, which is resisting authoritarianism. And I think that creates, it's not just the first order effect of the people who try to use it in that way and end up with liabilities to their safety or succeeding in their goals, but also um, everyone else is kind of, there's this panopticon effect where if everybody is self-censoring and not using it to its full potential because of those hazards, then in some sense censorship resistance is not there, right? It's it becomes a vague idea that's not actually describing the realities of the system in practice. Even if the code says, okay, well, a miner will confirm any transaction, but like, what if the users just think twice before pressing send and decide not to, because that's a form of censorship. So for censorship resistance to be a holistically real property of the system, I think we also need to protect privacy in a way that's understandable to developers and to users, to communicate the risks, and to be in control of the consequences. Yeah.
Yep. Awesome. All right. That was great. So we're going to do that. We're going to go through. We're going to zip through. I guess we're not going to go as deep as we could, but this is to give more of a overview of like some of the areas that we will deep dive into in the future. So we've got here on the screen the original Bitcoin white paper here. Why did you want us to look at this in the first instance?
Yeah, I think the right place to start with this subject, kind of the overarching model, is wallet clustering. There's been many papers about this, and the ideas go back all the way to the Satoshi white paper. So if you scroll down to section 10, this also relates to the recent post I had on the Spiral blog.
Yeah.
Which basically only touched on this. So today we're going to go a little bit further than that. Basically,
just before you go, just to mention the Spiral blog post. I think it was this one, right?
Yes.
Yeah, wallet clustering basics. Maybe we can talk to that a little bit later as well, or maybe to end or something to round up. But yeah, go ahead.
We're basically going to be covering everything that's in there, and some of the next post. It's just to give a sense of like the historical perspective and how slowly an understanding has been developed. So Satoshi already predicted two. So there's the multi-input heuristic or common input ownership heuristic. This is the idea that actually, let's go back. Can you switch to the mempool.space tab and first talk about the structure of transactions? So in Bitcoin, transactions primarily consist of a list of inputs and a list of outputs. And inputs mark outputs of previous transactions for deletion. So this transaction is pretty famous. It's the first transaction in Bitcoin. We know kind of what happened because Hal Finney, who was the recipient of the payment output of this transaction, wrote about it on the Bitcoin Talk forum. And this transaction spends 150 Bitcoin input, which is famously the mining rewards of block 9. So if you want to find this transaction, the easiest way is go into a block explorer, type 9 into the search box, and you see a block with just a Coinbase transaction. So Coinbase transactions don't have inputs, but that's where the money ends.
Why am I seeing just zeros though?
What do you mean? Just sorry, the resolution for.
Let me make it a bit bigger.
It's more about the video encoding. So
let me. You might not. Yeah, I think you might have to change that on your side, or you can also have it up in a separate browser on your computer as well, I guess. But
yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing. Yeah. In fact, I have it open. I just need to find the tab.
Oh, okay.
So for me, it shows up like a 50 Bitcoin input, and then a 10 Bitcoin output, and a 40 Bitcoin output, which is.
I think
maybe I sent you the wrong link.
Yeah, maybe. Let's see.
The transaction ID is F4184FC.
F4184C. Yeah. Maybe let me refresh. I don't know what's going on here. I'm getting zero. It's showing zero for everything, so this must be a. Let's see. That was so weird. That is so weird. I'm getting like zero for everything. There must be like a bug or something.
JavaScript content blocking.
That is weird. If I just go to, let's see, if I just go to normal mempool.space. Let's see. Okay, yeah. That is, looks like it's working, I think. All right, yeah. Let me try and go back to, let me copy the link you sent me again.
You could also use blockstream.info or any of the other.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. I probably just copied it wrong. Let me just try and copy it again.
I don't think that's likely, because if the transaction ID has any typos or anything, then
Yeah, it would just error
that
out,
would
right?
be a miracle for another transaction to exist.
Yeah, that is so weird. I'm literally getting zero, so everything, even in like the blocks, it's showing like zero BTC. And that is so weird. Let's try Blockstream though. Let's see if what is it?
You can just change the base URL. The path should be the same because they're both Explorer based.
Is it blockstream.info? Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it would be TX, and then the transaction ID. Yeah, okay, here we go. It's working now. That's so weird. I have no idea what's going on there. But okay, yeah, I see what you're saying here. So we've got one input, 50 BTC, paying out to one output that is 10 BTC and another output that's 40 BTC.
Yes.
Cool. All right, so
this is the first. This is the first transaction in the blockchain that's not a Coinbase transaction. And Hal Finney described what's going on the forum. So I think the first thing to observe, and this should be like common knowledge to most people, is that the amounts are not hidden. The amounts are just there to see. But also the connections between the transactions are there. So this was already like, here we know, because Hal said, well, Satoshi sent me 10 Bitcoin. We can follow the chain, right? Like you can look at, if you open up in blockstream.info, open up the details, you can see where these transactions were spent to. So the 40 Bitcoin output, which we know is Satoshi's remainder, that was spent in block 181, and Hal's output was spent around in block 92,240. This transaction was in block 170 for anybody keeping track. So there's, once you start following this chain of transactions, it becomes less and less clear, right? The next transaction that Satoshi sent spent, I think, so there's the 40 Bitcoin input, and then that sets off another 10 and a 30. So who knows what is the payment there?
Block 181. So if I click through to block 181, I should see that then, yeah.
Yep.
So he spent, the 40, or they spent the 40 BTC to 10.
If you click just on the outpoint link, then that takes you directly to the spending transaction instead of to the block. For these blocks, it's easy because most of them just contain like a Coinbase and maybe one transaction.
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah.
So one of those outputs is still unspent today. So presumably Satoshi was asked to send somebody else something, and either it was lost or forgotten or who knows. And then the 30 Bitcoin output is spent in block 182. So here on Blockstream info, we see privacy analysis says address reuse. That's kind of the first thing to take into account.
Yeah.
The idea behind clustering is well, transaction outputs are only spent once, and there is no balance, right? So if you spent an output and the payment amount was less than that output, as we saw in these examples, then you send the remainder to yourself. And we can conjecture based on the information external to the blockchain, i.e. the forum post, or based on a variety of heuristics, which is the payment output and which is the change output. If the same public key is used twice in two different outputs, then it's very clear that those two outputs are controlled by the same entity. And I want to draw a distinction here between
That has a
controlling.
name, right? That has a name as like the common input heuristic. Is that correct?
No, that's still just addressed reuse.
Right.
And that,
Okay.
unless you assume that losing your keys or leaking your keys, like if we just assume that never happens, then it's not even a heuristic, right? It's just cryptographic proof that it has the same owner.
Right.
So that is like the most basic form of address clustering. You just say all the coins that have the same address belong to the same owner. And I want to draw a distinction here. For me, the most intuitive way of thinking about it is the output script is what's controlled. So like the input side of a spend is attributing that coin to who controls it. But for a payment, the entity that controls the coin is not the entity that created the coin. So like in my mind, when you slice things up together in the structure of a transaction, you're clustering the outputs value along with the inputs that paid for them. But the script kind of belongs to the next user. And that's just a slightly clearer way of distinguishing between who are you attributing this output to, like who created it versus who controls it. It gets away from that confusion. Okay. So if you keep going through this chain and the values keep splitting, like at some point you're going to have to use more than one input to fund a payment output. And that's where the common input ownership heuristic comes in. So if you see two coins with distinct addresses, and they're both going into the same transaction, that's the point where you can heuristically conclude these two coins are probably owned by the same user. And even though they don't share the same address, you can still cluster them together. And just that principle has given rise to a wealth of blockchain analysis techniques. This has been refined on and extended with other heuristics, but like even just that very simple concept, which Satoshi already describes in full, I think it's the first paragraph of the white paper where we scroll to. So that is, that's where chain analysis kind of starts. It starts with the white paper.
Okay. Okay, makes sense. I figured out how to do that. It was just me being very stupid, or either like not a clear UX. I was like, why are all these showing zero? And like, yeah, there's a tab here at the bottom where you can change over to view it in BTC. So or Sats actually.
Oh.
So
it's like a conversion.
Yeah.
Okay. It was in chat.
Yeah.
I couldn't read the full chat scrolling by. Okay,
yeah,
cool.
Bitcoin Savior saved us there. All right, cool. So let's hop over to this quantitative analysis of the full Bitcoin transaction graph paper quickly. Let me make this a little bit.
So this is already in 2011, I think the ePrint was uploaded. It was eventually accepted to publication in 2013. Um, so as far as I know, this is the first research. I'm sure like people on Bitcoin Talk already discussed the the implications of tracing through transactions before that. But as far as I know, this is like the first academic research. And what they did is they tried to cluster transactions and attribute them to various entities, also utilizing external information. So this is like the next big theme that I want to touch on, which is it's not just the data on the blockchain that can be used to cluster transactions, but rather any sort of information. So like typically in privacy, you think of an adversarial model, and it's framed in game theoretical terms, very much like in cryptography. So what the adversary is trying to do is guess who done it and do that better than chance. So if there's like 10 suspects and the adversary is able to guess 10% of the time who done it, then that's basically as good as you can get. That's what guessing according to chance would give the adversary. If the adversary has some sort of advantage, so they can use some of the information available to them to make a better guess than just a random one, are better than 10%. And one way in which you can do this is by looking at, so the multi-input heuristic gives a fairly reliable, so for typical transactions, you don't really see inputs that are owned by more than one entity. And this paper like explores address reuse, explores this, and also tries to map these not just as pseudonymous clusters, but actually correlate them to real world entities. As far as I know, this was like the first research. So around this time, people started thinking about, well, how do we address the privacy concerns? And mixers were already a thing. So what are mixers, or custodial mixers to be more precise? It's an entity. You send them your money, and they send you other bitcoins in return if they're honest. So
What's an
there's a
example
long
of
history.
a wallet, a mixer that is out there in the wild?
Bitcoin Fog, I think, was. I don't know that there's many operating today. In the early history, there were a few. I think Bitcoin Fog is the most prominent like name today because of the court. There's an ongoing trial with its alleged operator. So I'm not 100% up to date on the details of that litigation, but somebody is claimed to be the operator, and they're disputing it. And but I haven't really heard much about custodial mixers
Okay.
over the last several years. This is all like early times.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the idea there is, well, if people are able to cluster related transactions and guess correctly what the payment output is and what the change output is, and use the multi-input heuristic to merge those clusters. So like what actually is clustering? If you look at the transaction graph as a network of nodes and vertices, you can think of it as like gluing together vertices. You could also think of it as adding additional edges, undirected edges, onto the directed graph model of the transaction graph itself. So like typically, when modeling this as a graph, there will be one vertex for every coin and one vertex for every transaction. So like when OXT was still operating, that's what the visualizations did there. A lot of the earlier papers visualize it that way. so you have this, like, a transaction is like a single node and the collection of coins around it, and those coins will be linked to other transactions. So you have like this, in technical terms, it's a bipartite graph where there's two kinds of vertices, and transactions only point at coin vertices, and coin vertices only point at transaction vertices. So you have this like alternating layers in the graph. And like typically it's modeled as a transaction's inputs point at the transaction points at the coins that it spends, and the coins that it creates point at that transaction. So you could take this and you can also draw edges that connect between coins that belong to the same cluster.
And then visually, like you can literally see like the journey of a coin through X amount of time.
So that is a bit ambiguous because a coin only exists until it is spent, right? But you can trace the funds, right? If you go back to the mempool space view, the sort of flow diagrams that they have there, you could claim that that's like most of the satoshis going into this transaction went into the second output, right? That's what the diagram is showing. If you believe in ordinal theory, then you could claim that a specific satoshi went to some place. But what wallet clustering tries to do is abstract this at the level of wallets, not at the level of individual coins. So instead of trying to say where a specific satoshi went, you're saying all of these coins were controlled by the same entity.
I see. Okay.
So all of these coins, including the spent ones, belong to the same owner. And therefore, this owner created this payment, which maybe belongs to a different entity. And you can start to, like, every cluster is identified with a specific entity. And as coins, which are edges that traverse these cluster boundaries, are observed, then these edges kind of give you the structure of the economic graph, right? You can see the flows between the different clusters and learn what people's transactions mean in a relational sense, right? Like, this paper did the such work. Yeah, sorry.
No. Okay. So to conclude on this paper.
And later it was followed up by, so the Bitcoin mixers became a thing. The next paper in the list was the first empirical study of that. So
is
they
the right
got
one?
a budget.
A fistful of Bitcoins characterizing payments among men with no names. That's an interesting title.
So if the first analysis was not really capable of like looking into what goes on in the mixers, what this paper did is they actually got a budget and they sent money through those mixers. And in this way, they were able to learn more about the entities that interact with mixers and so on and so forth. So, like, this just goes to show that there's many ways of like attacking this problem, and the history of papers on Bitcoin privacy have always been kind of like creatively building on what's already known. Yeah.
With regards to just a slight tangent, what's the kind of current status of Bitcoin privacy research? Are you seeing still quite a lot of research and investigative work going into Bitcoin privacy stuff, or is it quite?
I don't know how you would quantify a lot, but there's definitely, so like the last two papers that we have on the list are still looking at wallet clustering, which is not surprising because that's kind of the default model for looking at privacy. There's also like wallet clustering is purely an on-chain thing. So I don't want to discount various
Right.
papers that have looked into the peer-to-peer protocol level leaks or stuff that does both at the same time. So, for example, dusting attacks were trying to leverage Bitcoin Core's rebroadcasting behavior, which is a peer-to-peer protocol leak, in order to reveal clustering information and link that to IP addresses of nodes. So it's like there's many fronts on which the research is going, and for today, I only kind of wanted to give a historical overview of wallet clustering, but
Yeah.
the last two papers that we have on in the open tab are quite recent. They're from the last 3 years, and
Okay.
I know of at least one more paper that was published recently that even builds on top of those. So stuff is still being learned.
Good. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, so the next chapter in the history of this stuff is coin join transactions, which are like, well, technically the multi-input heuristic is bogus, right? Like Satoshi described it as if it's a rule, but actually in the protocol, you don't see that as a technical restriction. People can construct transactions with other parties where, like, I may spend some inputs and you may spend some of the other inputs, and both of us have outputs that we want, and we can shuffle everything. And that would be some people would call that a coin join already. Some people would have a more strict definition of what coin join means, but more broadly, we can call these collaborative transactions, and all collaborative transactions kind of break the multi-input heuristic. So the next several papers that there's I didn't link you, but Jonas Nick's thesis work, which looked at validating these heuristics. So when I say these heuristics, I also mean there's a multi-input heuristic,
Yeah, I was just
but
about to ask,
also
can you
various heuristics.
yeah, I was going to ask, can you give an example of like another heuristic?
So the main one at the time, and it's already described in the previous paper, the Fistful of Bitcoins paper, is all sorts of techniques for guessing what is the payment amount, was the change amount. And there's a few historically valid examples, like BitPay, for example, always rounded to an even 100 Satoshis, if I remember correctly. You can use, so if you're buying a product that's priced in dollars, and those dollar prices will tend to veer towards round figures, or like, I don't know, 9.99, right? So that's basically 10. So if you look at the historical exchange prices and you look at a transaction that was confirmed on some date, and you see these like wild Satoshi figures, but one of them happens to be very close to a round dollar amount at the prices around the time that this transaction was confirmed, that's much more likely to be a payment output than a change output. So people have proposed all sorts of heuristics like that. Some older wallets, today this is not common anymore, but would always place the payment amount first and the change amount second. There's more nuanced things. So these days we have more script types. So the payment amount similar to the like has the same script type as the input values? Sorry, not values and amounts, the actual coins. Right? If you're spending two SegWit inputs and you're creating a legacy output and a SegWit output, it's much more likely that the legacy output is the payment. So all of these are kind of ways of guessing which is the change output and which is the payment output, and collectively those are called change identification heuristics. So a bunch of those were studied, and then this paper basically says, like, so the second author is affiliated with Elliptic, which is one of the Chainalysis or chain analytics companies. Chainalysis is a different company.
Mm-hmm.
And what they're kind of saying is like, not only are these heuristics, so address clustering and the multi-input heuristic, like they're kind of saying they're more effective than people suspect. And if I remember correctly, it's been a while since I reviewed this paper, but they also support this with some proprietary information that they have access to. So like, as a company providing services to exchanges for compliance reasons, their job is basically wallet clustering, except they also have all the KYC information to go along with this.
Right.
So my interpretation of what they're saying is like, we know what's going on, and the heuristics on their own are already enough to do, like, we can validate their accuracy with our proprietary data, and it's substantially effective.
Yeah, and here's one
This
of these
paper is
diagrams you was alluding to a bit earlier as well. Just quickly, I'll read. It's a graphical summary of the most significant flows of Bitcoin between the largest address clusters during Bitcoin's first 5 years in existence. The vertices correspond to address clusters. Red vertices are darknet markets. Purple vertices are gambling services. Green vertices are exchanges. And blue vertices are mining pools. The grey vertices are not immediately identifiable using publicly available information.
So note how that's phrased. Like, maybe they do know some of those entities.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, so this is already like the collapsed view. So like, if you imagine doing this on the transaction graph, well, you would color a whole bunch of coins and there would be a network, and all of those coins collapse into just the one cluster in this graphical representation. Yeah, this is already quite an old paper. So there's been follow-up work, but kind of like historically important, I would say. And the open source equivalent of this, or the like public access science version of this, is Jonas Nick's thesis, which did very similar validation, and it's cited in this paper, by exploiting the BIP37. So this is like a feature for light clients to save on bandwidth, that was popular with Bitcoin J based, so like Java based mobile clients normally. I don't think we have time to go into the details, but the gist of it is, the wallets leaked more information about the set of addresses that they're interested in than was previously believed. So by collecting this data from the network, Jonas was able to analyze the blockchain and cluster addresses much more reliably than using just the heuristics, and crucially showed that, well, if you use this more accurate information to validate, the heuristics are actually really good. Like, you get, I always forget the numbers here.
If you have KYC information, like you say, maybe that's a topic, a whole new topic.
This is not KYC information. This was, I guess, a protocol level leak with the implementation of BIP37 Bloom filters.
But
so
if you have KYC information, it only strengthens.
Oh, it strengthens it much more, arguably.
Yeah. And
the question is, well, how much of the blockchain is labeled by KYC information and how much isn't?
Right.
But all the data that is labeled also serves to undermine the privacy of the data that is not labeled, because of a process of elimination, basically. So we'll look into that in much more detail in one of the next streams when we talk about intersection attacks.
Cool.
Yeah, so the last two papers are more like note the dates. This is, I think, submitted to the
20,
ePrint archive in,
2022,
yeah, I don't
July
know when it was
2022.
published.
Yeah.
So this paper makes a very, very simple observation that you can, so wallet fingerprinting is a whole other category of concerns that people have been worrying about for a pretty long time. So, for example, if you always use an n lock time value of 0 versus a recent block height, that's a statistical pattern, right? Like Bitcoin Core typically uses n lock time values that are recent due to what's called a fee sniping attacks. So if you see something that looks like a wallet cluster and all of its transactions set that value to 0, it's probably not a Bitcoin Core wallet that generated that set of transactions. And this goes like there's so many different fingerprinting patterns. So, for example, with ECDSA signatures before Taproot, the size of the signature could be optimized to save a few bytes. It just takes more computation to grind until you find a signature value that just happens to be shorter to encode because of some leading zeros in its representation. That's a fingerprint, right? And sequence values for relative time locks, whether or not you used replace by fee opt-in, the script types that you use, the orders of things showing up in the transaction. All of this information is potentially useful for guessing whether or not two potentially related coins are actually related. So what they did in this paper is they took that very seriously, and they analyzed a whole bunch of wallet fingerprints and used that to as a sort of ground truth, which is arguably a bit of a reach. Like it's still a theoretical model. Like we don't actually know that those are clusters, but it's much more reliable than just the change identification and the multi-input heuristic on their own. And then they using this kind of almost obvious insight, and I don't like. It's not obvious because nobody had done it until that point, right? But they were able to show that you can do substantially better than was previously believed about guessing output heuristics. So that like they used the wallet fingerprint information to kind of get a better clustering, and then they used this to train some simple machine learning stuff, so what's called a random forest model, to do a better change identification heuristic kind of before that information about fingerprints was available, right? So like after the fact, you kind of hide the spend transactions that come later, and they showed that you can substantially improve the reliability of change identification heuristics by taking a more data-driven approach. And yeah, this is recent research that's showing, like it's demonstrating that wallet clustering is even more effective than the already very effective, or claims of it being very effective 5 years prior. I think the previous paper was 2017.
Let's see. This was
2016.
where are you seeing that? 20...
On the left
here it is,
side.
Yeah, 2016. Okay.
So the point here is like there's more that can still be done to attack and the attack privacy, and chain analytics companies, given that this is their line of work, they
Mm.
probably know of all of these techniques.
Mm.
Something notable here is recent work by, oh, I forget her last name, Ishana. So I think walletfingerprinting.org or something like that. Sorry, I should have prepared this link in advance, but
It's fine. I can
um,
find it. Wallet finger printing. Let's see.
I have the link. I'll send it to you.
Yeah, cool.
Oh, is there a chat feature on this thing? Yes, there is.
Or you can send it to me on Discord actually. My computer's
I
a bit slow.
closed that so I wouldn't have any
Oh, okay.
distracting
Okay.
notifications.
Is it the Wallet Explorer one? The Wallet Explorer.
No, that's just
Oh,
a
that's different.
funny, like, yeah, to be
Okay.
honest, I should have dealt with it already. Um, okay, so you should have the link now, both in the
Oh yeah,
stream
cool.
chat and in the
Yeah,
Discord.
yeah. Got
Um,
it.
this is fairly recent work that just tried to do a much more comprehensive taxonomy of different wallet fingerprints that could be used. And as far as I know, nobody has yet leveraged these new characterizations in order to support wallet clustering. So the ideas of the paper that we just looked at could be strengthened substantially by this new information about richer wallet fingerprints that are now known to exist thanks to Ishana's work. And the
Okay.
last paper we have on the list is kind of doing that. Like
This one here.
um, yeah, they don't they use a different set of wallet fingerprints. So, but what they so as opposed to the previous paper, here they're looking at the wallet fingerprints themselves as a kind of heuristic and used again proprietary data obtained from chain analytics companies. So the data was, I believe, like pseudonymously labeled transactions associated with large exchanges, and so they were labeled with clustering information, but without any of the identifying information, just like this coin is associated with that coin, etc. And if you take that ground truth information as accurate, I believe that it is, and generalizable, I'm not so sure about that last one, like how much of this is only applicable to those kinds of transactions which they could obtain good labeling information for. So, like, is that representative of the blockchain as a whole? I don't know, and they don't really know in the paper either. But regardless, they showed that for the transactions that they did have this high quality label information for, the wallet fingerprinting here based heuristics are insanely accurate. Like they're able to
Mm.
lower the error rate substantially more than was previously believed. So basically what this paper is saying is like the theoretical assumption of the previous paper by Malta Moser and Arvind Narayan, that paper kind of just took it as self-evident that using wallet clusters based on wallet fingerprints is a valid way of thinking about the problem. Here, they showed empirically that based on the proprietary data, yes, it is very, very accurate. All of this is just to say, like, this has been studied for, well, I guess 15 years now.
When was this paper?
Um,
This was
this was
2022 as well. Okay.
2022.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. There's a very recent published paper that did some network theoretical analysis. We won't touch on it today, but like people are still looking into wallet clustering and the state of the art. Like there's this famous quote from some NSA spook the attack only gets better, it never gets worse, or something like that. Like,
Mhm.
so the capabilities to de-anonymize users, whether it's for compliance or for nefarious reasons or for the chilling effects of making Bitcoin into a dystopian surveillance state sort of instrument
Mhm.
for control, regardless of what your goals are, or as privacy researchers defending privacy and learning about what the attacks are, the capabilities only improve with time because the historical information is not going away. The KYC labeling information, which might be siloed, that's probably not going away either. Um, and the techniques are improving as people realize, like, hey, you can combine this information in new and interesting ways and make progress. Like, so yeah, I mean, more than 10 years after Satoshi already anticipated the heuristical analysis of the blockchain, people are still pushing the state of the art and obtaining kind of alarmingly accurate results for. So, I guess just to summarize, wallet clustering is a serious concern. It affects everybody, and without very good reasons to believe that your transactions are not clusterable, you probably should assume that they are. Even if you're not directly using the same coins you withdrew from a KYC exchange, or even if you send funds between multiple wallets, or you use different wallet types, or like um, there are many ways that, like, folk theories about how you can protect privacy, and I would really caution against taking those too seriously. Um,
Right.
there's a difference between plausible deniability and privacy here, and I think it's kind of um, in colloquial discourse. Often, plausible deniability is framed as privacy, and I would argue that's not really the same. If the ultimate goal is to protect the censorship resistant properties, because to do that, we need to be concerned with the privacy of the most vulnerable users, the users most likely to be harmed by the consequences of this. And that could be any of us, right? Like, who
Mhm.
knows what reality is going to be a year from now, 10 years from now. Yeah, that's
Cool.
kind of my
Okay.
summary of.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Awesome.
so the last thing we forgot is just the Mt. Gox and others wallet clusters, and now this is called CoinJoin Mess, but this is just a
Mhm.
humorous, like, um, this is the result of naive clustering with just applying the the heuristics, um, and it leads to what's known. I really should have mentioned this before. The cluster collapse problem, where if there is some confusion, in this case, it resulted from Mt. Gox basically doing collaborative transactions. Like, people would submit their private keys to the website, and the website would construct batch transactions based on these user keys. So in effect, you had
What?
coins that are
People
owned
would
by
submit
multiple.
their private keys to this website.
Yes, to Mt. Gox,
Right.
not to the Wallet Explorer website. But the
Oh, okay.
resulting
Okay.
transaction graph from this kind of dubious practice was
Mhm.
a large set of transactions which had the coins of multiple owners associated with them. Um, so cluster collapse is like the problem that you have when you overzealously link together coins. In the end, everything just becomes a single cluster of everybody's coins. And so this cluster for a long time was known as Mt. Gox and others. And it, like, 10 years after Mt. Gox went under, it was still, like, supposedly making new transactions. And so a lot of the more modern heuristics or techniques are about avoiding cluster collapse. So, like, how aggressively can we cluster things? Like, if you're as conservative as possible, then every coin is just its own cluster, and Bitcoin is truly pseudonymous. But if you assume that any potential link implies that coins are owned by the same entity, then inevitably you cluster everything as being the actions of just a single entity, and reality is somewhere in between. So yeah, sorry about
Awesome.
neglecting that link.
No, that's all good. Awesome. All right. I think we're coming to the end now. You do have
Yes.
this post on the Spiral
Yes.
Substack as well. That kind of we've just gone through much of what this post highlights. So
Oh,
if
we've gone
people,
through everything.
yeah, exactly. So if
This
people,
is
yeah, if people want to go over to the spiralbtc.substack.com. They can subscribe, and we've got a whole host of other um, posts coming up in the future as well. All right, cool. Thank you. Thanks for that, Yuval. That's very in depth to some degree, and I'm sure it will help. There's a lot of reading material that people can go away and dive a bit deeper on by themselves, and reach out if they've got any more. Reach out to you if they have any
yep.
specific questions and queries and stuff. What would be like, I don't know, like last kind of parting message? As you said it, you said something interesting just a couple of minutes ago around that, like some of the, I don't know if we want to call them like mainstream narratives around privacy and plausible deniability, and even from a user perspective, um, thinking you have the way at least the way I understood what you're saying is like you might not necessarily have the privacy that is either being promised to you by some service or what provider, or that you think you have through your own procedures and practices, and that it is um, essentially just like a lot more complicated than that. And so, like any guarantees that you think you might have as it relates to your privacy is not is a lot more, nuanced to that. And I guess we've touched on it, and we'll touch on it more in the future. But would you say that's one of the parting messages from this kind of stuff?
Yes. And also that it's very sensitive to your threat model. So for some users, plausible deniability might be all that they really require.
Mm,
But
yeah.
if you feel that your personal safety is at risk, or that of your family, for
Right.
example, when the Celsius exchange went under, they published partially redacted addresses of the various users. And ostensibly, this was to protect the public, right? It's part of a litigation against a fraudulent exchange.
Mm-hmm.
I think they ended up accidentally putting a lot of users in harm's way, because anybody could look at the transaction history, and sure, some of the characters were blank, but it's a trivial problem to figure out what those transactions actually were. So that is one dimension of it, and the other is, even we didn't really talk about coin joins today.
Mm-hmm.
So you might think that if you don't need that level of privacy, clustering, like just do a bunch of dummy transactions, that's probably not enough. But even CoinJoin privacy in the context of wallet clustering, as we will explore next time. So um, the blog post covers like the first 5 minutes or so of today's stream. The next one will cover the rest of today's stream. The one after that and the next stream, I think, will focus on intersection attacks. So this is a very important paper from 2017, I think, which looks at how you can use some of these techniques to break CoinJoin privacy, not just naive transaction history
Right.
privacy.
Right.
And that is a very interesting rabbit hole. So yeah, I
Awesome.
think that's
Awesome, awesome. Well, yeah, thank you, thanks, Yuval. That was very good. If anyone has any questions, they can reach out to us, Twitter or Discord or all of those kind of places. Um, I did see a few people throw some sats our way as well, so thank you for that. I'll make sure, like, when it gets to some, I don't know, significant amount, that they get used for some kind of open source initiative. Um, So yeah, thanks for that. And yeah, we will see you on the next one. Peace. Okay. All right. I think we're done.
The green dot is still blinking for me. Okay, it's no longer blinking.
All right. Here we go. Yeah, I think we're off now. Awesome, man. Yeah, thanks for that. Um,
Yeah.
if you click on okay. Oh no, I was just reading the YouTube chat. I didn't know we had someone say something there as well.
You should have
Yeah.
mentioned PageOn Dev Kit. Now that I think of it, but too late. Next